G'day, legends. Welcome to the ISS News, the daily snapshot of content you actually need to see. I'm Anthony Meixner, and with me this morning is Shane Healy, the terrorist hunter. He is an expert in countering violent extremism and counter-terrorism. We've got him on this morning to talk about three topics: the recent attacks in New Zealand and how that relates to the rise of neo-Nazis in Australia. We're going to talk about the difference between violent extremism and counter-terrorism. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the blackmail possible happening with the COVID to jab or not to jab. Shane, mate, welcome this morning. How are you?
Yeah, good, Max. How are we?
Good. Hey, let's get straight into it. I want to talk about the recent 60 Minutes article on neo-Nazis in Australia. And some alarming pieces of information in that there was actually there's a number of ex-defence personnel being recruited in that. And I guess looking at that and how that relates to the attacks in New Zealand, mate.
Yeah, so it is alarming, but it's not something that's new. If you look at what a neo-Nazi or a Nazi socialist ideology is, it's about nationalism, which is the same as we've spoken previously, that same drive to defend the country. They take it a few steps further in really isolating who they're defending and why. So in the case of a neo-Nazi, they're defending the white race. So they're completely against multiculturalism. So that's why it's right wing. Where your left wing or your left ideology is inclusion. Everyone's welcome. Multiculturalism, everyone is free to be a citizen, where the right wing, or, in this case, as 60 Minutes portrayed, the neo-Nazis, it's all about they're inferior, they're bringing our nation down, we need to rise up and take back the Australian virtues. So that's the... what they're trying to, their ideology, what they're trying to achieve. But they get to the extreme side of that. A lot of it, if we go to a Defence Force understanding, there's a lot of them that actually try to get in the Defence Force because of that. They feel, they believe or have a perceived purpose to defend Australia and Australian values. But their version of Australian values are completely different. It's actually what is accepted in society. So they usually, and even in that story, the majority washed out, didn't make through recruiting because of some of their views. Would they work with a Muslim, or would they work with someone of a Jewish faith or whatever? And they're like, no. And as in a battalion, you just look at the uniform. You don't care what's inside it. We're all brothers and sisters under one flag and one uniform. And that's where they fall short in that aspect. So they still look for or gravitate towards someone who thinks like them or espouses what they perceive as their belief structure, or where Australian society is starting to fall down. And, they come together. And if you looked in that 60 Minutes story, they were, a lot of young blokes meeting together at that RSL club, and that leader starting to chant all sorts of not even racially motivated, politically motivated rhetoric. We're gonna bond together. We need to be ready for the fight. We need to take our country back. That kind of it's empowering rhetoric that those disenfranchised and those members of society who aren't sure, that may have been persecuted. So there's a lot of cases where they've been targeted deliberately or undeliberately through violent attacks, whether it be robbery or something, from a minority community, and that's fueled their insecurities to then latch onto this neo-Nazi kind of ideology and groups, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so they're looking for a tribe, looking for a purpose, and they need an outlet And I guess this is where they can start to radicalize people, isn't it?
Yeah. I hate the term radicalize, but yeah. So basically, yes. So because there's a lot of people. If you look at your Pauline Hanson's, your Fraser Annick's, your politicians that have that similar view, they kind of gravitate towards that. For a number of reasons. It could be a sense of belonging, like you said, they just want to fit in somewhere. So do they really mean it? Or they just, want to have a social group of friends? And in that 60 Minutes story, they were going to that house and they were doing weights and kickboxing and, that's what they were after. Then, they talked some crap after. And it's kind of like, one-upping. One guy will say something and then another guy will say something and another guy will outdo him and I hate this group or I hate this group. And it kind of festers within their groups, which is the danger because, as you know, and we've spoken about young guys doing dumb shit and getting egged on, that's the trajectory that they can inadvertently get on. And it can be sometimes too late to stop, as we've seen in New Zealand and especially in America, where they get to a point and that they believe that violence is the only answer to further their cause.
So these are sometimes vulnerable members. I mean, I'm not saying they're idiots or anything, but sometimes these are vulnerable members of society. They're in a group environment where they are hanging out, and then we start this mob mentality, one-upping. And
100%. And that's a really good way to put it, is the mob mentality and disenfranchised and a loner or it's actually, there's a lot of evidence to show it's the same reason why young blokes join motorcycle, bikie clubs or footy teams. They're not the best footy player. They might even just run the water, but they want a sense of belonging. They want to be able to say, I'm a part of the, whatever football club or rugby club. It's a similar outlet. For I'll say 80% of them, then you get your hardcore leaders, and that 60-minute piece showed that main guy who, he was making them say swear allegiance, and but even he didn't understand the actual ideology of what Hitler was espousing and why, but he was using it as a vehicle for him to empower himself. He wanted status as being a leader. And a lot of them, we spoke about sheepdogs and wolves. They're actually sheep. They're not wolves. They're just followers. They just want a sense of belonging. And that's where the difference between counter-violent extremism and counter-terrorism is.
So with all these other movements happening at the moment and the Black Lives Matter movements we saw this with the elections in America. People like Trump is never going to get in. He's too extreme. And then deep down when the polling booths and you're in that private and you're just putting that tick on that piece of paper and people are like, holy fuck, he won. Is this sort of some kind of a rebound or a reaction to all these, like your racist, all like systemic racism, what is it, critical race theory? Everyone's starting to feel so marginalized Australians, just everyday Australians who never thought they were racist, aren't racist, and they're like, now you're white, you are definitely racist. Is this pushing them into this? And is this something we've got to worry about?
Yeah, and that you bang on there. That's where the actual threat, and I use that because it's a lack of a better term, but especially in the space of people not understanding the way geopolitics or politics, what is the left, what is the right, they just kind of get pushed through the media and society to, you are that person, not that's who you are. For example, Black Lives Matter, oh, you're white, you're racist. Well, hang on, mate. Like, actually, my neighbours have been, from Sudan for the last 10 years and we have barbecues every Sunday. But you just get lumped into a group. And then all of a sudden, that's who you are. And that's really what's playing out in America. But the reason that Trump won and why he's getting so popular again, he went to those little American towns that had lost industry and said, I'm going to make Magna, I'm going to make America great again. I'm going to get your jobs back from China. And the same thing you see in Australia. That's why Pauline Hanson and, the Palm United Party get votes is because they go to those little towns or they go to those disenfranchised parts of Australian society and feed everyone's someone to blame. I lost my job. I did, as you know, I do assessments in this space. And I used to live in Frankston, Melbourne, 2000, 2001. And I was doing an assessment of someone last year from Frankston. And I was trying to work out, is he a bigot or is he a violent extremist, right-wing violent extremist? And he was only, in his early 20s. And he goes, when I was a little kid, all the corner shops were owned by Aussies. Now they're all owned by Indians and Asians. They're invading our country. Well, okay, that's what your view is. But do Aussies want to buy those shops anymore? Do Aussies want to put the hard... There was a story yesterday that we need 30,000 unskilled migrant workers for agriculture because Aussies won't go and pick trees and do those jobs, so we get Indians and that in. But those disenfranchised and join these neo-Nazi movements will use that kind of political tone to say they're choosing, foreigners over Australians. Australians need jobs. Our unemployment rate is this. Look at you guys. You can't get a job, yet the government's employing these people from overseas to do that for them. Now, if the government said to those unemployed Australians, hey, I've got a job for you in Mildura picking cotton, fuck that. But that's not what they use. They use it as you're being replaced by foreigners in your country. And that's how they build on that patriotic nationalist rhetoric. And that's where the danger comes.
Mate, that's a great sort of look behind the scenes, and it's always great to have you on to discuss these sort of issues in your field. So how does that relate? I mean, this is going to go straight into the second story. The difference between counter-terrorism and countering violent extremism and the different groups.
Well, so this is something I've spent the last 2 years really pulling apart because I didn't understand or know the difference either until I started working in the CVE space and had to learn it. And basically, academics are the worst for it, but everything gets wrapped into counter-terrorism. So the first thing to define what is terrorism, and it's the flash to bang. And if we use the Link Cafe siege as our example here, when Man Monis went into the Link Cafe, it was an act of terrorism. Again, I'm going to be broad to explain the theories. But prior to him going in there, and he was on the radar for New South Wales police and that, it's violent extremism. So he can be interviewed. He can have his ideology unpacked and counter-narrative. Why do you think that? Why do you think the Islamic State has the right answer? Why do you think an Islamic caliphate in Australia is a good reason? And you can work against them, but he hasn't. There's no violence associated with him at that stage. He didn't get violent until he went into the Link Cafe. So anything to the left of the link is countering violent extremism because you have the ability to do intervention. So in the national security space, every day the national security hotline probably gets 200 to 300 calls about, hey, there's one of my neighbours all of a sudden is starting to play racist heavy metal music, or someone that I used to go to school with has now converted to a new religion and he's, saying this or whatever. That's where you can intervene. So you can go and have a conversation. You can have an interview. Why do you believe that, violence is permitted in order to justify your cause? So if we look at Man Monis, he started believing in the Islamic State's ideology, which was, the world's become corrupt again, and we need to go back to practicing Islam as it was practiced in the life of Muhammad, the real Salafi Wahhabi doctrine. And in their thought process or in their ideology, they believe if you don't believe or want that, then they're allowed or permitted to use violence against you to either get you to come on board or to kill you. basically. So if you know that that's what he's thinking, and you can have that conversation to go, hey, why do you think that? And have a counter narrative argument and potentially deviate him from that path of violence. That's what counter-violent extremism. If he can't, or you don't have that conversation, he does the link cafe, goes in with shotguns and whatever, that's terrorism. So you need a flash to bang, a violent means to end that, which is where your counter-terrorism police and your tactical side groups come involved. But the moment that, as you saw in Sydney, they flashbang went in there, neutralised him, and then they, stronghold secure, the police take over. It's back to counter-violent extremism, because if he didn't die and he was arrested, and there's a lot of this, you'll see in court now, there's a lot of cases where, Ben Breaker from Pandennis in Melbourne, he's coming up for parole. So is he still believe in that Islamic ideology that got him arrested for in 2005? So that's what counter-violent extremism on the other side of the flash to bang. You can, again, change his narrative and you can come up with intervention strategies. So he can still be a devout, almost extreme Muslim. He just can't admit, accept, or believe that violence is acceptable to achieve his religious end state, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so taking this into some Australian real world groups, and especially the new ones popping up, so vegans as one. Are we talking people that now go to farms and will violence and destruction of property and equipment? Are they now violent extremists?
Yes. And it's funny. So I teach a radicalisation and violent extremism course, and I was teaching that to government prior to the last election. And we actually joke about it. Vegans are getting more and more violent and they will become designated violent extremists. And then the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, actually came out and said it. He said, look, and you can Google it and there's a couple of very good articles about it, but he said, you are now accepting that violence is permitted to further your cause. So when they run into state restaurants and throw blood everywhere and whatever, they're doing that and using violence to get more time on social media or TV on the news, because just holding a poster anymore is not getting them on the news. So therefore they're not furthering their political cause. So they've accepted that they need to be the Sea Shepherd. Now, I believe in what the Sea Shepherd does. I fucking hate the thought of catching whales for bullshit scientific where all they really want to do is eat them.
Absolutely.
But the moment that they start ramming whale ships and they're using violence to stop them, they've crossed that line from being, extreme social eco-warriors to eco-terrorists, because they're using violence to achieve their political end state. For good or bad.
So how, if, let's say we then group a particular, the one percenters, bikie groups and stuff,
yep.
Or we say, okay, if you're a part of PETA or a particular
yep.
group, and we put you, or you do a particular act that can be classified under the Terrorism Act, do these people understand what part of the law they can fall under by conducting these particular acts?
No, and I'm actually having conversations now with some academics, especially Julian Drugan from Macquarie University, who is an expert in this field and doing a lot of work with him. And COVID protesters now are borderline on violent extremists. So when you see those anti-mask rallies and they're punching horses and they're using violence to achieve their end state, which is, we don't want to wear a mask, or, we're sick of the lockdowns. They can have a peaceful protest. And Mick Fuller, the police commissioner, he doesn't fuck around. And he's like, hey, you can be as peaceful. We'll let you be as peaceful and as many as you want, but you can't be violent. And look how hard they've come down on, dudes punching horses, throwing, paint and all that stuff. They're using violence to achieve their own. So technically, that's violent extremism. So
from a historical standpoint, we talk about the War of Independence in America.
Yep.
And could you say at the start, and I know you've got this in some of your articles and some of your teaching doctrine about, there's some good memes too. One man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter.
Yeah.
Had the Americans, I say, I suppose, had lost the War of Independence, they would have been terrorists.
Were terrorists. At the Boston Tea, they were terrorists at the Boston Tea Party, 100%. Yeah. You look at, if anyone's familiar with Michael Collins and the rise of the IRA in the 1920s, 30s, they were guerrilla terrorists and used violence against the British and to achieve their aim, which was to get their own rule in Northern Ireland. Yes,
so how do you do that?
Party in Sinn Féin after, but they used violence to get there.
And Nelson Mandela in Africa?
Well, no, he never used violence.
Never?
He's a very special case, and Gandhi was the same, non-violent protest. So there are examples globally where you don't have to get to violence, but it also comes down to your status. Nelson Mandela was Nelson Mandela. He was getting a platform. But let's look at, say, the suffragette movement for all our sisters out there. This was the women's movement at the turn of the last century to get the vote and to get equal pay and equal rights. Now, they all used to wear white and they used to have different colour earrings to display where they sat in the organisation. But they realised that just standing there and having some rallies and protests wasn't going to work. So they started getting violent. And therefore, that got them the notoriety and the publicity that they desired, and they achieved their objective by getting the vote, being allowed to work and having essentially similar legal status in society as the men. It's not unknown, and most people don't know or understand who the suffragettes were, but they were an all-women organisation that used violence to achieve their political end state, and they won. The Black Panthers.
Yeah, they were a proper paramilitary group near on, weren't they?
Well, yeah. And, a paramilitary group to a violent group is just expertise, really. Molotov cocktail to IED. But they're still using violence, and that's the key. You can be as extreme as you want in your beliefs. You can write nationalist Australian views on Facebook, I think that we should out this group or whatever. That's freedom of speech. The moment you say, death to, or hey, followers, let's go and bash A, or let's do this, that's when it's violent extremism, and that's the issue, and that's against the law. On any ideology, whether it be Sunni Salafism, so in the Islamic space, like Islamic State, right wing, your national patriotics or your neo-Nazi movements, or your left wing. It's the acceptance of the use of violence in order to achieve your end state. That's both illegal and the problem.
I think a lot of people need to get on and listen to this, because that really defines exactly where you can be persecuted under the law, right? And under what act.
Yeah, and the other problem we've got, and we spoke about it, we look at America for our left and rights and P's and Q's, especially in this space, but they come up with new terminology. Like they've got domestic political terrorists now. That's basically the Democrats saying to the Republicans, you're a terrorist because we don't like your beliefs, MAGNA, make America great again. The Democrats want to be all inclusive, which again is, all people under their flag, so they should be. But by persecuting the Republicans or by persecuting a group within your country, you're making that division. And that's why we're seeing America implode, and that's why it's still CVE, because you still have the ability to negotiate, to talk, to get discussions amongst different thinking people together and come up with a common solution before it gets to violence. So the moment it's violence, that's terrorism, and that's counter-terrorism. They're going to be violent. They've grabbed guns to go and shoot people in Martin Place, or he's going to try to bomb the MCG. That's terrorism. But either side of that is counter-violent extremism. Why do they believe that? Why do they think it's justified to use violence? And how can we get them off that path? In a nutshell.
You heard it here, guys. Go and check it out. Have a listen to this and do your own research and have a look.
That's the key, yeah. Your own research. Just Google right-wing Australian politics, left-wing Australian politics. Look at what you believe and why, and what the others believe, and have a conversation amongst your friends. You know, where do you sit? How do you sit? And that's what we're not doing at the moment, and why you get these disenfranchised people looking for these splinter groups like we saw in 60 Minutes and buying in because no one else is having a conversation.
Yeah, I think the power of having a discussion, and you can have differing opinions. You can have a discussion and not have to change somebody's opinion on a view. You can just table ideas and thoughts.
And 100%. And the key is, and I'll say it and say it and say it, it becomes an issue when you think that violence is allowed to change that other person's view. Whether it's a mate and a slap across the head or someone you've never met and you want to punch him or whatever, that's illegal, and that's where the trouble starts. But have the conversation, be respectful of everyone's views, and we're good. We can have that conversation.
Great, mate. Thanks very much. So our third story today is COVID, and I suppose to clickbait it, to jab or not to jab, and the implications. And I want to talk to you about this, mate, because you wrote the protocols for COVID for the NRL, and your experience in the army before you left was in that biological and chemical warfare space. I mean, does this really, for us being ex-military, is not dissimilar to how there's never been a real choice per se to get a jab or not to jab?
No, Chip, go to the RP. What for? Just go to the RP. Here's your jab book. What for? You go to Iraq, Afghanistan, Timor, stand there, roll your shirt up. It's sometimes I sit back and look at the debate society and think, well, every year you get the flu shot. Have you ever once previously asked your chemist or doctor who makes my flu shot? Like, they've overcomplicated and used scare and fear mongering tactics for something that is a no-brainer. Go and see your doctor. Hey, which one's better for me? Have I got any underlying health issues that I must? Just like you go and see a doctor in the army. The only difference is we didn't get a choice. You want to deploy? Yeah, bang.
And that's what we're sort of seeing now. So the infamous mefloquine trials of the 90s, late 90s, early 2000, where they said, if you would like to deploy to Timor, go and get the jab. Because if you don't, you're not going. So all these young blokes are like, I want to deploy. That's why you join the army. I guess I'm getting the jab, and the implications that happened. Oh, it wasn't a jab. It was tablets, but the implications of that happened. Now we're sort of seeing the same tactics. And I know the government's trying to motivate people to go and get vaccinated, to open the country back up again. But, I want to go and have a beer at the pub with my mates, but you can't unless you have the two jabs, right? So the same similar blackmail situation.
Yeah, and this kind of actually also morphs with what we're talking about in the right-wing versus left-wing political space, because if there's that rhetoric, if you're Australian and we're all one, you'll get the jab, not just to help you, but to help your neighbour and someone else. That's the real nationalist. We're all in it together. Then the other side is, I'm an individual. I can make my own choice. I don't need government telling me what's good or bad for me. That's my right. Now, they both have merits and they're both correct, but what's the greater good? Now, that's the question. So you got to look at, it's an individual choice based on your medical history. It's like smoking, the dangers of smoking. If you smoke and, you might get emphysema or whatever. If you don't, you're going to be healthier. But you have informed choices. There's so much fear-mongering going around about the jab, the COVID jab, that people are just confused. And at the end of the day, you look at the statistics, we've had how many millions of Australians vaccinated from various jabs? No one's died.
Yeah, I think, this have happened 70 years.
Same thing from Panadol.
Well, in the 70s, if we were more, so if we removed social media, and we went back to a more nationalist viewpoint as a community, 50 years ago, would this be an issue? Would people just have gone and got a jab because it's the thing we've all got to get it done?
Yeah. And this is part. Think about it. every year coming into winter, you'll see in your GP and your chemist, come and get your flu shot. And people go, yep, I get my flu shot. It doesn't say we've got an AstraZeneca flu shot or a Pfizer flu. No one's ever given it crap. They just get their flu shot. And a lot of the time, it might protect you from 3 strains, and they pick up there's a 4th strain in Europe that's going to come out, and you've got to get another one. No one's ever questioned it. They've just overcomplicated through indecisiveness and some fear-mongering for political points what is essentially an easy personal medical decision.
Yeah, I think, this is the reason why we sort of started the ISS News and the podcast, was to have conversations where we weren't trying to reduce fairly important issues to a 2-minute or 30-second clickbait article, where we could open discussions and encourage people to go and dispel some of the misinformation and the fear that is being perpetrated through mainstream media at the moment.
And, look, as you said, I've worked, the army unit I was in, that was our bag, chemical and biological, warfare and pathogens. And I worked with some exceptionally smart doctors and scientists, and I was confused initially, at the amount of misinformation coming out there, and I was like, well, hang on, that's all incorrect. At the end of the day, that's why what got lost in it was have a conversation with your GP. You know what I mean? Where do I sit on the health spectrum? Do I have an underlying heart condition or medical condition? No, you're young, fit, healthy. Okay. Well, it's no different to any other inoculation. How many times has someone gone to Bali or Indonesia and had to get a malaria or some sort of vaccination before they go? It's nothing that no one's, especially, young diggers or ADF people like us, that hasn't happened to us 10, 20 times during our career. But it's just become such a political football game that people are confused now.
And
I'm waiting out for the Pfizer injection because it says it might kill me. No, that's not what it says at all.
Yeah, I think this misinformation and fear-mongering is something that we'll have to keep an eye on. Look, mate, I think that's about all we've got time for today. I really appreciate you coming on, mate. Always a pleasure. Guys, keep tuning in, and we'll keep creating a platform for you guys to come and have a snippet of the news and have that conversation and give you some resources to go and do your own research. Guys, that was the ISS News. Tune in next time, and we'll see you around. Cheers, mate.